Hi everybody, it's Bobby McGee here, and I have a nice privilege tonight to talk to a good friend and colleague Jeff Booher from TriDot, which is a fantastic patent-pending triathlon training system, and Jeff and I are going to spend some time talking about that tonight. How are you doing, Jeff?
Doing great, Bobby. Thanks. I'm looking forward to it.
Can you hear me there clearly?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're just coming through loud a little bit there. So let's see if we can make something available for everybody online. Hi everybody, welcome to this hangout here. It's something that we're trying to do a little bit more frequently. Not quite as smooth with as we need to be, but hopefully we can provide you guys with lots of fun. So I just want to introduce Jeff a little bit. He is a USAT certified level 2 coach, as well as having some track and field certifications, as well as USA cycling. So he's pretty up to speed in all three of the sports. And he has more than 20 coaches on his staff and hundreds of athletes that he takes care of. And I'm always in awe of individuals that can handle those kind of loads and have the wherewithal and the ability to design things that can manage all those coaches. Jeff also coaches pros. He's got folks in the 830 range in the Ironman, and as well as some guys going 350 in the half Ironman. So obviously knows how to handle the top end of the sport as well. And I don't often meet people that have been coaching for as many years as I have. But Jeff's been coaching for 23 years, so obviously lots of experience there as well. But his main focus at the moment is helping age group triathletes get the most out of their training hour, the most bang for their buck. And I think that's the greatest challenge. We all can do some good work, and we can all get out there and do our training, but we don't know if we're maximizing what we have available. And the biggest challenge for age group triathletes, and that would be probably the main part of our conversation tonight, is for those triathletes to be able to know that the time that they're spending when they're training is the most effective that they can possibly do. So with that, let's just jump straight in, Jeff. I know that very often when you hear about a system, I've grown up around systems. I've grown up, with approaches like Lydiard's approach and Jack Daniels' approach and so on, and sometimes the dangers of those things are they're pretty rigid. So tell us what's so different about the TriDot approach.
Yeah, it is. It's been hard for us to communicate. Actually, when we think of system, you do think stringent, rigid, doing one thing the same way for everybody, but it's not that at all. One of our taglines, taking the guesswork out of triathlon training and racing. A lot of athletes will look and say, I don't have any guesswork. I do exactly what my coach tells me to do. Or a lot of athletes will say, hey, I'm a data-driven, I'm into the numbers. I do data-driven training. And so I have just a different perception of both of those. We come at it a totally different way. So rather than a guesswork from an athlete standpoint, what we're talking about with the system is removing the guesswork on the coach's side. So many coaches out there are doing with their athletes what they did, what made them successful. Maybe they were a very accomplished triathlete themselves, or they bought into philosophies or strategies, once upon a time, and they just keep perpetuating those. They do them over and over. It's more based on tradition, what's always worked, but they don't have the data to back it up. A lot of athletes will use data after the fact. They'll download their Garmin, look at their power files, and so we're not talking about data even from that perspective after the fact, that snapshot data. Our system is a methodical approach to proactively use data. We have normalized performance assessments for the swim, bike, and run, and normalize those. So we have a scale of how we measure those things. So a swim correlates to a certain score for a bike, which correlates to a certain score for the run, so that you can proportionally measure not just which one's stronger or weaker, but by how much. And then you're allowed to relate those, because we have specific numbers, to different physical factors, the athlete's body composition, their age, their weight, and we take all that into account. And then the system comes into play by taking that normalized data, putting it through a methodical process to where we're doing the same things when we design the program every single time, so it's a repeatable process. If the same data were good to go in multiple times, you get the same data out on the other side that takes all that into account. And we have some proprietary measures of training stress and workload and how that's manifested in the different sessions. And then we're tying those sessions to race execution plans so that the actual race execution is done, the protocols, the pacing strategies, and all is done the same way every time, so that when you get to the end of the spectrum, the results and a race result, you're able to correlate that back to a specific execution plan, backwards to the specific training, and to those assessments. And so we're able to measurably and repeatedly produce the same results over and over. And it's that, in that sense, it's a system or a framework to where we collect meaningful data related to the athlete's specific individual characteristics. And to tell you the truth, it's taken a lot of technology to make that happen, and just literally thousands of athlete training cycles over 6-8 years now. We've been working on it to be able to prove and produce these different thresholds. What should the workload distribution be for different types of athletes? So I think that, I don't know if that answers the question, kind of how the system works. It's definitely not regimented or a one-size-fits-all or philosophy. It's more about the whole process of how you bring an athlete from data going in to training plans to race execution plan to the actual performance results at the end.
I think that's amazing, and obviously those 6 to 8 years that you've been going at it for, keep strengthening the system itself. It's probably self-reinforcing in that way. I know from the single sports, my background in running too is that, the quality and the refinement of that data is always what makes a difference. And in triathlon, we're learning more and more that one of the things that differentiates the pros at the very high end with the age grouper is the lack of access to that kind of thing. We're starting to speak about the fact that it takes a village to prepare a single pro for world-class competition. And it sounds like that you've used all your experience and expertise in this system to gather a village opportunity in terms of support for the individual age group athlete. And that's fantastic. So that brings me to a question that begs what is your system finding in terms of misconceptions and training myths that people have followed for years, if they've been pretty successful themselves, and they know that 1 or 2 of the dozen things that they are doing definitely works for them, but they do the others just in case because they're not sure whether they're working or not?
I think that's exactly right, Bobby. It's kind of like in business. There's the saying that most business owners know that 50% of their marketing doesn't work. They just don't know what 50% it is. So they just keep doing it all, hoping there's something works. It's been interesting. I've been surprised at some of the things that we found that did work or didn't work. Every time there's an anomaly or something that didn't come out as we expected, I always drill down, and having the data allows you to go back and see why it happened and explain it a lot better than you can. So the system keeps getting better and better the more athletes that go through it. Some of the things that we found were a lot of things that I bought into for years, and some of them just a high volume approach. A lot of athletes will just think the more they do, the better. So the more high volume, very long sessions are going to get them where they want to go. But unless they do an amount of intensity to drive up their thresholds or to drive up different mechanics, limiters, they're not going to achieve more. And so we're able to actually see through the data how much does that take and how does that change when different types of athletes do different types of training. So we have these different subsets of populations of people that we're able to track and to do things similarly for, say, 50-plus age group people, and or people that maybe they're 50-plus, but they've been doing the sport for 15 years. So performance-wise, they may be like a 40-year-old, or a late 30-year-old. They're able to do things. So seeing where some of those thresholds are. So a lot of athletes, the misconceptions going after the more is better approach. So they're just doing extreme high volume. We've found that you can cut out as much as 40% of an athlete's training depending on what they're currently doing, but consistently at least 25% to 40%, and they'll actually perform better. So I have athletes, age group athletes that may have one peak big week over 15 hours a week, and they're doing 11 10-hour Ironman races, and they're doing better when they've done other systems for 20. So we've just definitively proved that the high volume doesn't work. But I think, go ahead.
No, I think that's amazing. Just in this lead up to the London Olympics, we found the same with a number of athletes that they were just training too much. They were not hitting those peak numbers because they were unable to do so because they were carrying so much fatigue from one workout to another, and that's what sadly triathlon training can lend itself to. If you too tired to run, you can bike, and if you're too tired to bike, you can swim. And so if you're standing still, you get antsy. And we've got such an OCD community that we just find people are training medium all the time. So it's really refreshing to hear that your system addresses that. And that brings up a question for me: is if it does that, and you have this data, how is this data carried over to the individual so that you can start making them aware of approaching it a little differently, looking for a different field, looking for a different subset of numbers that actually mean that they need to take it easy, or they need to do a bit more quality, or they need to have longer periods of time between their quality sessions, or whatever the case might be?
That's hard. So we don't take it as, it's not a kind of a trial and error approach to where we're training and we're going to wait and see in 2 weeks what happens. We can predictably go. We do almost a phase-by-phase approach, to where a phase could be 8 weeks to up to 20 weeks for a longer course. So that's one of the challenges, is to communicate to the athlete the reason why they're doing what they're doing. We have some athletes that come in and want very little feedback and interaction with the coach, and so they're not talking with them all the time, and it's harder to educate that athlete. Some athletes that you worked with will do whatever you say, and then they'll do their own research, and they just get it and they'll go. Others really need to know the why, and that has been a challenge for us. We consistently get the good results. The anomalies that we do have, when we go back and look at the data, it'll be athletes that are, well, my buddy's training, this distance, he's doing this many days, and they'll just be overtraining or pushing too hard on the wrong days or doing any number of things. So that's been a challenge, honestly, to show them, unless they want a higher level of coach interaction, then they can ask all the questions they want and they get those, those satisfied. But in lieu of that interaction, it's just impossible to do. I mean, how do you work with athletes when you're talking running form? Should they change their running form? And is there one right way to do it? How do you show and communicate to people who have run all their life or have these preconceived, beliefs of? I think people commonly think when they go swim, they need to learn that there's a skill there that's very highly, technique driven, and so they're more comfortable receiving instruction on how to swim technique. But when it comes to run, what have you found with receptivity to hearing how they should run, what drills they should do?
I think I'm in the same boat as you. Is that running is even probably the least technical of all the sports in terms of people that just buy a pair of running shoes and they head out the door. And so for people to, especially with our sort of community that is so driven, the triathlon community in terms of the run draws from overachieving, segment of the population, and so that more is better approach is difficult. And on the bike we have we have the SRM and the ability to measure watt data, and in the pool we have a pretty variable free environment, so we can measure progression. But on the run, it's a little bit more challenging. And so I think one of those differences for me in terms of what the pros are doing and what the age groups are doing is going out there much more frequently, finding the lowest impact possible benchmark type workout that they can do, and do that very frequently too, so that they don't get lost in 10 to 12 weeks of training without actually knowing if they're going in the right direction. I think more in triathlon even than in running, I find with the running that athletes get into these chronically fatigued states and then stay in them for so long that they become habituated, and they consider those chronically fatigued states as normal. And, it's like somebody, putting on a fat suit. Unless you give them, find some way to grab them by the collar and give them 3 to 5 days recovery and show them how suddenly their numbers just go through the roof with a little bit of recovery. So I think I'm bouncing this back at you and saying, how do you manage that in terms of they're on a system, they're going well, and then you start realizing that that those training stresses are not, they're not recovering from that. How do you alter that midstream in a training plan?
They work with a coach to do that. We don't find too much of that, actually. We have a little bit. That's one of the differences, I guess, in the strategy. A lot of the training stress, people will get chronically fatigued. They'll, and have this need for a week of recovery, or these significant periods of recovery. And we found that doing more frequent workouts that your body can absorb along the way prevents that. And so you're not having to take as dramatic of a recovery weeks. You're able to do testing in those weeks, even throughout the week. A lot of athletes are used to having 2 days off, 1 day off. And some of the TriDot athletes still do that, but a lot of them will train 6 or 7 days a week. But they'll break it up what they're doing, and cumulatively, I guess, consistency-wise, they're not having too much stress on any day, so that they're recovering and they're not in that chronically fatigued state. So that kind of goes back to what we were chatting about earlier with just that the long training. So many of them want to push too far or feel like more is better, and when they're in that fatigue state, they do most of their running, with bad form. So they end up habituating poor form and teaching their body to run slow.
I'm in agreement there. I think that whole concept that either mix your training up between doing very high quality, high intensity stuff very, very short, or do stuff extremely slowly for protracted period of times. Either way, don't do those that impact your training for too long term. So if you're going to go out and do some longer work, make sure that you either break that up or that you slow it down so considerably. But I think the triathletes get out, in terms of the run, they get out too infrequently, and then what happens is they figure, oh, I'm out here, I don't run much more than 3 times a week or something like that. So while I'm out here, I might as well push the pace along a little bit and get a little bit more bang for my buck, and it turns out to be completely counterproductive. Exactly.
So we try to plan that up front, or we do plan that up front. Here's how much they should do. Here's the paces that they do, and how many. And if they go over that, it's a big fail. I mean, it's not good for that session. The time to increase your paces are when you're doing a time trial or an assessment and kind of resetting. And once you earn the right to go faster, then it's safe to do those different intensities or the faster paces. But until you do that, you don't just do it in training. You don't just feel good on that particular day and do more than the prescribed workout.
I love that. I could hear the coach coming out on you once you earn that right to do so. I always say to people who want to do a lot of quality, you need a little volume behind that, and your volume can only grow if you're very progressive with that. So coaching pros and amateurs, what do you find are the differences in terms of their approach, and what can the age grouper learn from what the pros are doing differently?
Well, I'd honestly say they can't learn as much as they think they can. There's so many differences. A lot of the pros are doing stuff. They're out on the very edge. They're pushing everything to that limit. A lot of the pros have very similar body types. They're predominantly young. They recover quick. They have a background in running or swimming or something. So they're just very different physiologically. So there's a lot of things that they can do. And the other thing is, a lot of the pros will lie. They'll say, here's my workout, and they'll say, here's what I'm doing, but who knows what they're really doing. So they're either closet training, sandbagging, or who knows what. I think it's more important, to look at certain things. I guess consistency-wise is a very important thing, but for different reasons. So with the elites, consistency, they're needing to do that because they can't have that half-life, the deterioration of their adaptations for a very long period of time, because they need to maintain that high level performance, and they're competing very frequently. So they need to maintain typically longer during the longer seasons and more frequently be race ready quicker. Age groupers need the consistency, but for very different reasons. As they get older, as they get heavier, as a number of different things, they need to maintain that durability. And a lot of age groupers will take some time off during the off season. You know, we call it the out season, and they'll get very inconsistent. And with every year that comes by, they'll come back a little heavier, a little out of shape, a little slower to recover, and they can't just bounce back like they did in the past. Although, you know, ego-wise, you know, they believe that they can. That's how a lot of the injuries typically happen. So we try to make it a very consistent, manageable schedule by reducing the number of hours that they're training. It's something they can get in a habit of and do year-round and enjoy year-round. So consistency is different for the two. Another thing is just mindset-wise, the mental state. I think a lot of the you know, older athletes have old school thinking, so they're thinking back to tradition. Here's how we trained way back, you know, when I was a college athlete or doing whatever. So they have a hard time letting go of tradition, letting go of the way that, you know, the elite guys did it even 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and things we know so much more now. So they're holding on to the old school thinking, and it's hard to get them to do things new. Whereas the younger crowd, you know, they're not old school. They don't want to be in school at all. They don't want to pay attention or learn or really study. They just want to get out there and do it. Yeah, and so it's kind of, you know, reining them in or keeping them focused, I guess, and keeping them to train within their current means until they are able to progress. So.
Yeah, a bright coach always runs the risk of thinking that their athletes all really want to perform at the best of their capabilities, but a large part of the communities that we work with, they actually just enjoy the process of training so much that something like this is a good idea for them, because what it provides for them is the opportunity to train in phases from race to race and recover when they're supposed to recover, as opposed to going, I'm going well right now, I'm just going to push until I get injured, because I'll inevitably get injured, and when I get injured, that'll be my rest period. So, right. You know, the pros going from proactive rest and recovery periods to peak shape and then back round again, whereas many of the age groupers, they just go from injury to training too hard till they get injured again, and then they just consider that their season and roll around. And very often they become disheartened, and they leave the sport long before they can achieve their potential. And, you know, they don't realize that if they're only starting at 30 or 35 or 40 or 45 years old, and they haven't done triathlon before, or they haven't trained effectively for it before, they're looking towards a period of PRs and getting so much better, even though in terms of their age they should be on the downslope. They're not. They can still go up and up. And so you really want to encourage people to at least once give it a try, you know, and that's why I'm so pleased to see that, you know, you're offering a number of people that have some capabilities and opportunity to try the system out and see if they like it, and much appreciated. I'm sure a number of people are going to take you up on that.
Absolutely, I hope so. We have a lot of fun with it. It's really gratifying to see what the athletes are able to accomplish, just doing much more than they ever thought that they could. I know one of the struggles out there, you know, looking at just the different tradition, I guess, when I first started really studying, you know, triathlon, you'd see so many coaches or read articles on the internet that were very contradictory. And so trying to make sense of it all and trying to figure out what is, I guess, what's accurate, what should you be watching, and so many athletes are looking for a soundbite, a rule. So what is the rule? How many long, you know, rides, how many century rides should I do before an Ironman? Or how many quality runs should I do in a week? And they want this rule-based, one-size-fits-all approach that they can just apply to training, and it just doesn't run like or work like that at all.
It's been like that forever, you know. You've been around for a long time, and I've been coaching for over 30 years. And when I started off coaching, it was exactly the same thing. I just wanted a recipe. I just kept looking at what were the best athletes of the time doing, and then trying to find a way for my athletes to copy that. And nothing can be further from the truth. You know, that's why I think you know, a full-on individual metrics-based approach is so important. So many athletes who come to the sport, you know, their only background that they have and the only frame of reference that they have is what the very good individuals that have been successful have done. So they have to, if they don't have a system that they're working by that is looking at them individually, they're continually training, reactively to what's in the popular press, what's out there, what do they see people doing. And you're absolutely right. Simon Whitfield, double Olympic medalist, is famous for doing that, and so is Chris McCormack with his Macca with their websites where they only post the numbers from their very, very best workouts, and then they'll say, the day before we did this, and the day after we're going to do this, and they just sucker people into just absolutely destroying themselves.
Yeah, that's pretty funny to see that. It's kind of funny though, thinking about just the whole, with tradition and the fads that come along, and people do different things with this whole craze of the minimalist shoe and the barefoot running. I mean, where do you see that right now?
Oh, it's sort of run its full course. Of course, barefoot running can never be considered quite as a fad, but this particular form of the minimalist footwear approach has ended up in companies like Vibram being sued for contentions that they made that people will get rid of their injuries if they wear their shoes, and most of the people that were successful, that market segment is very, very tiny. It's 2 or 3% of the running shoe market, but that market segment is now very much on the decline again. Those people that were successful with the barefoot running or the minimalist running have spread the gospel and gone out loud and proud, and those people that have not succeeded, as all the physiotherapists and podiatry numbers have shown, the increase in plantar fasciitis and Achilles tendonitis has gone through the roof. Those people have quietly, without saying a word, just thrown their minimalist shoes away and gone back to the running store and bought themselves what always worked for them. So especially in terms of the triathlon community that is already so support and strength impaired when they get off the bike. I think a good thing that has come out of the minimalist era is that the running shoe companies have definitely taken a step, away from uber support shoes. All of them have dropped their heel heights. People are moving better. Shoes are generally much more flexible. So people are getting an opportunity to use their foot structures more effectively. But I think the strangest thing that's come out of this report, I was reading in Ross Tucker's website, the Science of Sport, the other day, that people that still heel strike when they take their shoes off or when they run in minimalist footwear, they actually heel strike even worse when they take those shoes off. So in other words, no matter what surface they're running on, they'll still put their heel down first. And that when they do wear a pair of running shoes, they attenuate shock almost as well as people that run midfoot anyway, and that people that are midfoot strikers don't get a lot of benefit from running shoes anyway. So that's a very interesting one. And so, again, we're looking at numbers like 87% of people being heel strikers. I don't know if you saw that other study that was so fascinating that they did with a non-elite running Kenyan tribe that had all the same factors going on. So they were habitually unshod. They wore very few of them wore shoes, and when they tested them, they weren't midfoot strikers. They were all heel strikers. And then they went and they took that same bunch of athletes and they had them sprinting, and when they sprinted, they were still heel strikers, the vast majority of them. So wow. I think this was just unique to these individuals from this one specific tribe that ran that way. But it does introduce fascination. It does introduce people paying attention. But it really, I really don't think it matters what kind of a foot strike you have, and it's more about, are you doing the least possible amount of braking that you can do? Is the running gait that you are using allowing you to collect sufficient training mileage without getting injured, and B, is your current foot strike allowing you to run as fast as your physiology will let you run? And I think those are the main takeaways from that. So it was a fascinating period. I think it was wonderful. I think Chris McDougall did a wonderful job with Born to Run. It was extremely well written, and every time you nail a stake in the ground, people will get caught up in that, and some people will benefit from it, and some people won't. But I think it's just a way for us to just bring some distinction, some objectivity to what we are doing, and see what works for us. I think in general in triathlon training, that's a problem, is people tend to follow fads, and they should be paying attention wholly and solely to their own process and their own experience.
Right. Well, I look at it, seeing how eagerly people jumped on, and I was listening, and intrigued me, fascinated me. I tried them, ran in them, did all the same stuff. I was on the bandwagon, I wasn't, promoting it so much, but, I was there buying the shoes and experimenting with everyone else.
Yeah.
But the concept is so common, that a concept or a theory or something sounds so good, and people are so willing to jump in before the data is there to support it. Just based on concept, and it sounds good. But then here, several years later, when we do have the data, and we're able to see what happened, and the injuries and all of these things, then we're able to assess that. And I think, the more that we can, as just triathletes and triathlon in general, look at actual processes and data, and evaluate what's going on with training, and try to quantify, how we measure workload and stress and all of these different things, how we manage that and just distribute it through a week, and how that affects different athletes. The more we can create definition structure around it, I'll say just visibility, so athletes see what they're doing and why. It allows people to make better decisions, I guess, with their training, and understand what they're doing, buy in and commit, and to do things that are healthy, rather than just going out and sampling, what another athlete's doing, or just taking the more is better, more pain, no pain, no gain approach.
Yeah, it's that whole concept fascinates me, how people will glom onto something as if it's a primary thing, and all of these things have their place, and they are useful. I was talking to Mike Doan, the swim coach down at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, and I was asking him what these funny shaped shoes were, and they were like flippers with a blade on the outside, and they were actually to increase the water pressure for the breaststrokers. And he says they just tear your knees apart. And I'm just thinking, you introduce these things into the triathlon community. All of us as triathletes, we love a gimmick, don't we? We love all this stuff. And so we can so easily get sucked into something. And, people approach me all the time, and they say, well, won't you teach me your running style? And I'm saying, I don't have a running style that I teach. What I'm doing, especially in terms of triathlon, is I'm looking at your run, and I'm trying to determine what has your life and the other sports that you do and your approach brought to your running that's hurting your running, that's holding you back. And so my approach is to try and reduce those limiters. And I think, only the very, very best athletes, maybe nobody out there at all. And I find this is a big difference between pros and non-pros, is that only the very best are able to perform their training plan as designed, because they're taking care of rest, and they're taking care of nutrition, and they're taking care of recovery and those things, and are able to do what I'm designing and what you're designing, because we're considering all the other variables as close to tied down as possible. Whereas if you look at the average age grouper, and it's they have their whole lives, they have their jobs, they have their businesses, and they don't realize how a tough day at work, or a troublesome situation at home, or even just simple things like new curtains or carpeting, or things like that, and they go out that afternoon, and you've given them a training session as if they've slept for 8 hours, and as if they've had 3 full meals, and they go out there, and they've been doing something that's just impaired their range of motion or their functional movement just slightly, and then they get injured, and then the first place they go is well, my training was wrong. But it's it's an incredibly complex subject, and people have to pay attention all the time. And I think once something like, all right, well, this next training session at the very least is based on a logical progression of where I as an individual was the last time I did this workout, or the last time I did something in this zone, so that I know that this is within my capability, and then pay attention to it, because if it doesn't feel like it acutely, then we need to back off.
Right. I think I see so many coaches as well. It's kind of difficult. It's one of the obstacles, I guess, just inherent in what we do. The more data a coach has about their athlete, the more intimately they work with them, typically the fewer athletes they work with. So their sample size is smaller. And with all of the athletes being a little different, it's really hard to determine what kind of training, what are those limits, how much can they take, how many sessions should they do. On the flip side, those coaches that have very, very many athletes in the can plans, or the one-size-fits-all approach. So they might do group training for a ton of people. They have the big masses, but they don't know the background of the physiology, those characteristics of all those different athletes, and so they're unable to draw the same conclusions. Not from that they don't have the population of athletes, but they don't have the data about them, and so it's kind of hard inherently to learn from those and to see how to train those athletes better if you don't have large sample size or comprehensive data. And I would say the benefit, or one of the fun things though about training elites for age groupers, that without the TriDot system addresses that for the age groupers, but a lot of coaches, when they're working only with elite athletes, they pretty much have a homogeneous, to some degree, much more so than age groupers, an athlete. The athletes are typically same age, same body type, same many things, and so they are able to see those patterns in what can and can't be done, and they formulate those opinions and conclusions of what drives those adaptations. But those can't always be transferred to training age groupers, because all of those age groupers run the gamut on all of those different parameters.
Oh, I completely agree. In the running world, it's often the case is that certain athletes fit with certain coaches, not only because of personalities, because of the system that they follow. But just in the last few years, I've seen athletes training together, even in a group as small as 6 or 7, and 1 or 2 of the athletes are not performing because that's a wholly unsuitable phasing for them. They need a longer mesocycle. They might be able to do the same kind of training, but need a half to a full day recovery more than the other athlete that they're training with. And I've seen that in real terms all the time. And then you have a high volume type coach which works for certain type of athletes. I remember having a great conversation with the great Aussie triathlete of the 80s and 90s, Craig Walton, and Waldo was telling me how very, very differently he approaches coaching the woman, and he coached Emma Snowsill versus coaching the men, and how even in that regard that the training is so different between the genders in terms of what they can handle. And obviously the guys can put out more power and so on, but it seems in general that the girls can hold on to longer phases of training. They can do the same kind of training for a longer period of time. And another thing that we notice about elite athletes is that they train very similarly. They take 4 or 5 years to figure out what works for them, and then they do the same kind of training all the time. And I think age groupers suffer because they don't do that. They go, okay, I did this, and I found that worked, and as you say, I'm going to do a little bit more of that or a little bit faster of that, but maybe what they need to do is do exactly the same thing that worked for them, just do it a little bit more easily or a little bit more in a refined fashion, just smooth it out a little bit. But that concept of looking for your individual customized recipe is lost on a lot of age groupers, and I think something like what you are doing is very, very beneficial, because now they're taking the shortest cut they can possibly take, because they're looking at their metrics and they're figuring out, okay, that worked perfectly for me. So next time around, that's all I'm going to do. I'm getting the performances. I'm sticking to that system, and the more they can handle it, the more confident they become. The more confident they become, the more they actually produce results in races that are commensurate with their own ability.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. So looking at just some of the different drills out there, I'm just curious what you'd say when you're working with age groupers. Do you see a commonality as far as maybe a handful, 2 or 3 run drills that are most applicable to most athletes? Like, these are the core ones that you should always do?
I think that is true. It depends on a little bit, as you say, on the athlete's build, the athlete's weight, and also the event that they're training for. But there definitely are a couple of drills that I notice would help the triathletes a lot, because they just are so much poorer at those drills than the pure runners are. And it's almost as if the frequency of the running and the volume of the running has allowed these people to learn these drills in a more organic fashion. But in triathlon, they have to learn how to do them, because they keep getting this blanketing effect, maybe from the bike and from the swim, and they also come from different backgrounds. So, you know, something like just regular skipping is a fantastic drill, and you can quickly, as a coach, learn or even as an athlete, learn that when you skip cognitively, in other words, you think about one foot on the ground twice, the other foot on the ground twice, the other foot on the ground twice. When you're thinking about it like that, and it looks very herky-jerky and uncomfortable and not a pleasant thing to do, then you have a skills deficit. So just regular skipping is a really good idea. And then once you're a very natural skipper, just messing around with taking short, quick little steps, getting the feet to the ground really quickly, or lifting the knees up nice and high and shooting the foot down to the ground, which is the A skip, or even that little hook pawing motion, which is the B skip, where you extend your leg a little bit out in front of you and whip your leg underneath you. Those are a great series of drills. And probably the king of the drills for runners would be what I call quick feet or ankling drill, where they basically just very, very small steps, maybe 2 or 3 inches off the ground, very little knee action. All they're doing is they're just pushing their feet down to the ground, stiffening their ankles, stiffening their arches, and just doing a nice little quick feet drill. I think it's somewhere on my YouTube channel. People will pick that up. But there's a number of references to that. Just those little pitter-patter drills, just for 8 or 9 seconds, doing 5 or 6 sets of those, you know, before you go out for a run. That's another fantastic drill. And I think lastly, probably something like the karaoke drill, which people struggle with in the beginning, but a lot of people have done if they were soccer players or basketball players, or they did some track and field when they were younger. They learned how to do that, you know, going sideways with the right foot going across the, if they're going to the left, the right foot goes across the front, and then it goes across the back again, and then they're controlling the movement with their pelvis and their core musculature. So that some people call them grapevines or twisters as well. That's an excellent drill to do as well. And you know, if the athlete is older and a little less skilled or a little bit worried about getting injured, all of those drills can be done just with a greatly reduced range of motion, because what you're looking for is rhythm and skill. You're not necessarily looking for a plyometric response or a strength power response.
Right. Well, great. How when you're I mean, we have some proprietary things that we do with workload and stress, kind of going from the opposite end of the spectrum, from you know, drills and the mechanics of it to actual training. What just historically, you know, have you seen as far as best methods to measure stress or you know, training stress workload?
You know, it's a very hot topic at the moment, and there's good stuff going on with, you know, ways to measure training stress load, like, you know, training stress scores or something like that. But I like to go right down to the bottom end. I know a lot of the elite athletes will have a favorite workout. I know from my track and field days, I used to follow all these great middle distance runners, and they all had a workout that told them whether they were ready to go. And you know, just a very short workout. But even looking at the strength issue, looking at you know, with the age group, if you can't hop on your left leg for, you know, 10 or 15 times and hop on your right leg for 10 or 15 times because you've got discomfort or such great fatigue, or it just feels so imbalanced or uncomfortable for you, you probably shouldn't be doing any kind of quality workout at all. And you know, another one that you can look at is just a vertical jump, just standing next to a wall with your arm up on the wall and doing a vertical jump, and just seeing how high can you jump when you're really fresh, how high do you jump when you know, when you're right in the middle of your regular training phase, and then if you've done a really, really hard series of workouts on the bike or on the run, you know, what's the lowest number you get, and just using that vertical jump. But something as simple as a 200-meter or a 400-meter time trial at a controlled effort, and just looking at how easy that goes and what kind of pace you're producing, is a good way for you to assess where you're at and whether you're recovering.
Mm. We take a little bit more proactive approach, I guess, in designing the plans that's geared toward assessing the athlete before a key session, or throughout in the middle of a mesocycle, where they are, how are they doing performance-wise. When we're measuring even the build of training sessions, I know a lot of people are familiar with the TSS, and that I think that can drive a lot of people to just the accumulation of points. More is better.
Yep.
And so it trains them to that, because that's a number they start attributing results with more, and not what comprises that TSS. And some of the things that we're doing, so we don't measure afterwards, upload a file and see what the average intensity factor is times the duration in minutes and multiply that out. One of the things that we found frustrated me initially, we've solved for, is accounting for the stress inside of a set with a TSS, looking at the average duration and the average intensity factor. It doesn't reflect what was done during the session. So you could have two threshold intervals during the session, very high, and the rest of it very low, which might have the same TSS score as an even pace, moderate intensity session. But from a stress standpoint, they're very different. Another thing, in looking at how it's used, a lot of times they'll use stress and workload interchangeably, and those are two totally different things. What's an absolute workload to one person may not be very stressful, because that TSS doesn't take into account that athlete's workload capacity. And so that's another thing that, proactively using metrics, you're able to overcome and account for. So you're able to do prescribed stress, but you're able to focus it, one, on the composition of the sets, but also make that stress relative to the athlete's ability to absorb that stress. And so it's not just the more is better, but what type of stress is that through the set. Another thing that we've seen is, even at a constant intensity factor, that over time that same effort gets harder and is more stressful. So a lot of athletes, on one dimension, understand that when they work at different heart rates or different paces, the higher they go, the more stressful it is. But they're not aware as much that the longer they hold that, it becomes progressively more intense. So what might be a threshold, doing a threshold set for 30 minutes versus one for 60 minutes. One is not twice as stressful as the other. It's exponentially more stressful. So
Absolutely.
Seeing, even at a constant or fixed intensity over time, and on a training stress side, if you were doing TSS, that would come out, to be just double the number. But it's more than double the stress. It takes you longer to account for. So, proactively, and having metrics for those, how you distribute that through the week, and how you account for the subsets, how do you account for the increase of intensity's impact, which is the stress at a set power or a set pace over time, becomes critical to avoid that circumstance where you are overtrained, you are supposed to go out and do a set that's beyond your capability. You're able to plan for that so that doesn't happen to begin with.
I agree with you. Before we move to some questions, let's just end up with, it's so interesting. I was talking to two very high-level Olympic coaches who have produced medals at the Olympic level, and the one was really gung-ho about working on a subjective fatigue measurement scale, and the other one was really gung-ho about saying we need to do everything we can to keep this as metric-based as possible. Doesn't matter how the athlete feels. And that concept of adrenalization, how even the right workout for the right athlete can be the wrong workout under certain, psycho-emotional conditions. And so our job as a coach is never over, and so when you're trying to help a lot of people with very little time, I think the simpler we can make it and the more we can get them to commit to a consistent process, the better.
Absolutely. It becomes much more predictable and manageable.
All right.
So do we have some questions?
Yeah. Jeff, this is Sam here, just reading the questions for you guys. Let me pull them up. For those of you on the call, if you go to the Bobby McGee Hangout page that you were sent your email originally, there's a Facebook comments box below it where I'm reading these questions from. So that's tridot.com/Bobby-McGee-Hangout. Okay, so first question is from Rich Crawford. Says, I'm 54 and doing sprint tries. I want to get my 5K pace back down to a 7-minute mile. If I do interval work 1 day a week, say 6 to 8 1,000 meters, each under 4:20 pace, how much time should I rest between intervals, and can the run-walk philosophy be applied to this training? I think that's for Bobby.
All right. You know, I think we've spoken so much about that. So I think rather than looking at it in those absolute terms, you want to consider the neuromuscular component. In other words, running at that exact pace that you want to run at for those 4:20 1K repeats. And you can take one of two approaches. You can either run them in 4:20 and rest as much as you need to be able to achieve that pace, or you can, you know, start off with something like, you know, 1-to-1 recovery, rest 4:20 in between them, and then just let the pace come down organically as you measure that. But any one of those two approaches, I kind of like the neuromuscular approach more, where you go 4:20, make sure that you hit the pace, and take as much rest as you need, and then over time bring the recovery down. But I would also work on either side of that, do a little bit of overspeed stuff, you know, faster than that, slightly faster, maybe some 200s or 300s running at about 350 to 4-minute pace. And then on the other side of that is also doing some tempo runs in the 440 to 445 range somewhere, you know, with, you know, 4 or 5 times 5 minutes of that kind of work, that kind of approach.
Okay, next question, Jeff, I think this is for you, from Gwen Converse. What is the amount of application downtime compared to the day-to-day load recovery, reload recovery, tired legs or injury prone?
Can you repeat that? I didn't understand that question. I'm sorry.
What is the amount of application downtime, I think that's exercise,
right,
compared to the day-to-day load recovery, reload recovery cycle?
I guess that's hard to answer. It would be different for every athlete depending on the difference. Wherever that athlete would end up, it would be a progression to that number. There's not one set measure or ratio. It depends on, you know, so many different things. There's not one metric to answer that.
Okay. And the next question from Mark McDonald, if not HRV, what data markers most directly answer the question, am I accumulating fatigue or am I shedding it?
Who's that for, Jeff or myself?
I don't know what HRV means, so...
Well, I think it's accumulating heartbeats, basically, heart rate, volume, not so?
I think so.
Well, I'll give it a go there, Mark. Training doesn't make you fit. Training exposes your skill level or your capability, and so any kind of training that you recover from in a sufficiently fast amount of time before your fitness starts to degrade is optimal fitness before you try and up those numbers or meet those numbers again. And that's what Jeff and I were talking about in terms of those you know, training stress scores. Is what you're trying to do is especially in terms of your critical velocity, the velocity that you're training at for your race, you're trying to collect as much training at that intensity as possible, and then a little bit above that and a little bit below that. So however that works, I hope that answers your question. I don't know if Jeff has something to add to that.
No, and that's one of those other things. I think it really depends on the athlete. There's not a one way to tell answer. It's kind of all in the mix and all on the, you know, the training that's surrounding the week, what it's made up as.
Okay. So the next question, I think this is for both of you. What is one of the biggest reoccurring challenges, or the biggest reoccurring challenge you face as coaches?
You want to start out with that one, Jeff?
I sure would. The recurring challenge that I face the most is getting athletes or communicating to them why they need to stop or why they need to pay attention to certain metrics and let other metrics go. In absence of ways of looking at their training load, their intensities, their paces, a lot of athletes will look to things that they've always looked at: weekly mileage or number of sessions per week, or a variety of different things. They'll have these reference points of races that they did a year ago and still believe that they can do that same pace even though they haven't been training for it. And so all of their references and their perceptions of how they're progressing, if they continue to focus on those things, will lead them astray. It'll keep them from performing, and to recognize the improvements they're making, and letting go of those things has been quite a challenge. But once they start seeing things, once that we do assessments, every 3 to 4 weeks in the different disciplines, once they start seeing those times come down, and once we don't show and do very much distance space at all, that I think is what I found to be the biggest culprit. If so many athletes are very distant, how many miles are you getting? They're hearing their buddies and training partners brag about miles or and such, but physiologically your body knows not how far you've gone, but for how long you've carried out a specific intensity. So it knows the duration. And so we try to really focus them on what intensity did you train at, and for what duration did you do it. And letting the mileage, the weekly mileage, let that just be whatever it is. Let your, how many miles did you do before at a key point in your training cycle? Let that be what it is. We're focused on your race duration and the duration of whatever intensity you're supposed to be performing, and getting them to adjust and be able to look at different numbers is hard, but it always comes up because they typically have a long background of working and looking at certain things as proof or measures of success or progress.
Yeah, I agree with Jeff completely there. People do what they like to do, and so sometimes that's not necessarily the way for them to progress. To me, the definition of a good coach is one whose athletes progress from season to season. So that's always my challenge. And then the other one is for athletes to peak when coach and athlete decided that was a peak event. And so if you look at that 60 to 80% of runners getting injured, and I'm sure that number is pretty relevant to triathlon as well, I'm looking at that durability, making sure that they're progressing from season to season. Those are my challenges. And then the last one for me is the individual nature and the non-generalized nature of peaking, and trying to figure out before it's too late in an athlete's build-up, what brings them to their best racing shape. Just simple concepts like, if they've just done the best week of training they've ever done in their life, tapering off that doesn't seem to bring them on. But a week or two after their best week of solid training and then a taper seems to bring them on. That kind of thing are the greatest challenges for me.
Okay. The next question we have is, and I think this goes a little bit to what you just said, Bobby, from Bill Converse. How much taper is required on average for an age grouper before a race? So that might be for Jeff and Bobby.
Well, I'll start this time, Jeff. Bill, taper is a very, very specific thing. I know in running there's all sorts of little oddities that you want to look at. For example, if you're tapering for a downhill race, you need to taper longer for a downhill race than for a flat or for a rolling race. The other thing to look at too is your muscle fiber type. If you tend to be more of a power type athlete, you do well in your high speed workouts, but you take a lot of time to recover, you're probably an athlete that needs a lot more taper. And an athlete that is very much an endurance type athlete that doesn't get impacted greatly by a lot of volume and does very well with the longer type workouts, with the endurance-based workouts, those athletes tend to need less of a taper. But the big thing is to really get that freshness up, especially early in the week leading up to the race. And then before the race, just facilitate and recruit the muscle. Just do a couple of little short intervals on the bike, the swim and the run, but nothing that's considered as training. Just gets you back up to that recruitment level, that facilitation level that you need to do. A bit of advice there is whatever training placeholders you had in place, whether you were training 6 or 7 or 9 times a week, try and maintain those placeholders so that your immune system doesn't get lulled into into a phase where it says, okay, it's time to get sick now, it's time to recover. So, even if you're going out the door for 15 or 20 minutes for a very easy workout, keep those placeholders in place.
Mm-hmm. I definitely agree with everything you just said. I think that consistency in that race week is key, because your body has been trained to do certain things, and when there's a drastic change or a dramatic decrease in anything, your body's going to try to figure out what's going on. I think the reduction of the amount of intensity, but not so much how intense it is. So you're still doing that race pace. I think it's also something that a lot of athletes will do is not. It would be good for them to do is not taper as much. That there's many different lower priority races that athletes tend to want to taper too much for. And for the most part, if it's not a peak race, they're going to perform better long term if they train through more and taper less for some of those non-key races. It may affect them on that very first race that they do. They're not quite up to the potential that they could have. But if they continue to train, when you combine the taper period with the recovery period after, they can miss as much as 10 days to 2.5 weeks of dramatically reduced training load. Whereas a lot of athletes have had that sensation where they have a great workout amidst a very heavy training mesocycle, and they say, I wish I could just reproduce that on race day. They'd be very satisfied with that bike or that run. So a lot of times the athletes are capable and comfortable racing at near the volume, or not near the volume, near the intensity and the overall workload is to where they train. So I think some people overemphasize tapering, especially for non-key races.
Agreed.
Okay, Bobby, the next question is from someone I think you know well, Jan Raula.
Oh, wow. Hi, Jan.
He says, Bobby, with the fast run perform at the top level of World Triathlon, which changes would you implement into the yearly run program? Thanks, Jan.
Just for those of you that don't know, Jan Rahula is the bronze medalist from the Sydney Olympic Triathlon, so we have a very esteemed guest listening in.
Wow.
Jan is a coach now in Australia and doing good work down there. Jan, I think in terms of the demands of competition and where the game is right now, especially with Alistair Brownlee having run 28:32 for 10K, you just more of what I've been saying is that we need to prepare the athletes to realize that their base speed, it needs to be up there. They need to have those 1,500 meter, 3,000 meter numbers that match up to the capabilities that they will need to display off the bike. So they should at least be able to run 30 seconds faster in a road race than they intend to run off the bike in a triathlon. And I think that's the reality of the sport where it is at the moment.
Okay, that's all the questions I have right now on the screen. So, Bobby, I'll give it back to you to wrap things up with Jeff.
All right. Just so that everybody pays attention to Jeff's offer free for feedback. Up to 200 athletes that are training for an Olympic distance or longer race and have been training for about a year. Jeff is offering free training there. So just look for that link on the Hangout page at tridot.com/FFF-BMES/HTML if you're interested in trying out what Jeff's offering. And then to all of you out there, Jeff and I appreciate this really very much. It was wonderful hanging out with you guys, and I hope we'll be able to do it again sometime. Send us some emails, let us know how it's going for you. Thanks very much.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bobby. Had a lot of fun.